All right, now for the official part. Hang on, I've lost my running sheet. Okay. Now, is Mr. Smith-Gander joining you today?
I had apologies from Craig. He sincerely tried to think that the major issues come up. He can't. He's tried to push it sideways. He can't get it. Louise was trying to get down from the territory, but there's an issue there as well. Both would like to join online at some later point if that's an opportunity. Okay. Not today, but at a later point.
No, we'll give them that opportunity. Yeah. All right, let's do this.
Passionate about the subject.
No, I want them to. Yeah. So we'll have a chat after this, and we'll get the Secretariat to make sure that that's noted, and we'll hook into another hearing. All right, we'll do the official bit. So I now welcome representatives from the Western Roads Federation. If you could please give your name and the capacity in which you appear today.
Cam Dumacy, I'm the CEO of Western Roads Federation.
Okay, Cam, and we are in first names. I'm not going to pretend because we all know each other. It may be a large country, but the industry is pretty close-knit. So, Cam, would you like to make an opening statement? We really want to hear from you.
Yeah.
And you take as long as you need. We've got you down for, what, 1 hour, I think? There are other senators online, Senator Rice and Senator McDonald, but you must use this time to tell us everything you need us to hear, and then if there's time left over, we'll throw a few questions.
Okay. Thanks very much. But the first thing I just want to say is, obviously, Tim Dawson's just been up and spoke about this. So I represent my other capacity is effectively on the State Secretary for the employers, so from where I sit with Tim. But if we sit down as employers as where we stand in Western Australia at the moment, and we sat down with Tim and we said, do we want a safer, better paid, better looked after, more respected industry, more professional? We're going to agree. And on 80% of the stuff we'll agree, this 10% will argue, and that's later our method. But in the statements in the previous session, the thing was talking about we want better pay. Now, representing companies, we'd go, yeah, we'd like to pay more. But the companies themselves have got to start to make money in this industry. And this is why we're so far behind this inquiry. And we congratulate you on calling it, Senator. The thing is, our transport industry, the owners of these companies themselves are not making money. And so one of the points I just want to point out as we start this whole conversation, if we want to pay better, we've got to start to make a profit. Profit's not a dirty word. We need profit to invest in better equipment, to pay people better, to lift the standards of our industry, and it's just not there. So I want to start with the first example. And this is one that sort of occurred back 3 or 4 years ago, but it highlights and illustrates the fundamental problem that exists within road transport. We have the mining companies when it's a bit of a downturn or, they need a job done. The mining company purchasing officer or the contract officer responsible for transport will be given a performance bonus to get transport costs down by, let's say, a theoretical 10%. They're going to get a bonus for doing that. So they go to tender and they put 2 tenders out, and we've got, we'll call it Senator Still's Fabulous Transport Company, high quality, good quality system, proven safety management systems, great record. I come in with Cam's Transport Company theoretically, and I'm trading on price. My safety management system, my conditions, all those things, those regulatory compliance elements, are just ticks on paper. It's just tokenistic. Your company set up to a standard. If you want to meet that standard, it costs you money. It's therefore going to cost you more when you sell that service. On mine, I can undercut you because my system is tokenistic. So the mining operator, transport company, purchasing manager sits there. They have 2 bids before them. One with a fully compliant, proven record transport company, and one from a transport company 10% cheaper that's tokenistic. Which one do they take? Given the fact that they are going to get a personal reward for getting transport costs down 10%, they will take the cheaper one. So what does that really mean? In essence, what the company directors of the mining company are saying is to the general public and to our road transport industry, we are not prepared to pay a risk premium for the lives of the transport operators and the general motoring public. We're not prepared to pay that. We instead are going to push down, not pay that premium, and we're going to push the risk onto the transport industry and onto the general motoring public. Until such time as that changes, nothing changes. Until such time as we can turn around and say to a major mining company or alike, you've had an accident, we're investigating you, you took Cam's cheap transport, we are now going to investigate you and we want to know the basis of your decision. Why did you take the cheaper option? And prove to us that they had the safety, the management, the compliance and all those regulatory aspects in place. Until that changes, nothing changes. Because I sit and I listen to Yogi and I listen to Tim and we'll listen to the others online. Their points are valid. They're saying we are being undercut on rates or we're being pushed down on rates by the companies. But the companies themselves are being pushed down on rates. It's a chain. Got to go to the source. Start at the source. And we start at that point and we say, why did you do that? And I want to come back to a second part of that after the statement. So in terms of that, the second element is we also cover the urban area, the metro freight. The fastest growing area of transport is online delivery, parcel services. By the end of next year, we're on target in this nation to deliver 1 billion parcels. But we also have this ongoing thing within that that sector and also in the general road freight of the equivalent of online brokering companies. So they say they'll broker a task, customer goes online and says, I want to move something from Perth to Joondalup, wherever it may be. Companies go online and they bid for it. Owner drivers, subcontractors, even unregistered operators go on and they bid and say, oh, I can do it for cheaper than that person. I'll undercut them. Where in the world does that online company held responsible for their choices? They're not. These online companies are driving the rates in our industry to the floor.
So you're like an Amazon?
Like an Amazon or
Uber
Uber or those sort of general terms.
Yep.
They need to be held accountable. They are part of the transport chain. They need to be held liable for their decisions and held accountable. They're not arm's length from this. They need to be held to account. So that part we want to bring in. The second one, and we've had this conversation at length as we drove up and back the other day, or last week to Kununurra, a week before, is enforcement. In the entire trip that we did up and back to Kununurra was at 6,500 kilometres. Great truck driver too, by the way, Senator. We didn't pass a single on-road enforcement for heavy vehicles. Yet we have a kit where our drivers, our companies, who go out and meet the compliance standards, they pay for a compliance officer, pay for a safety officer, pay for the training officer, pay for an on-road for a driver training instructor. It costs money. But they're being undercut by other operators who don't do that, who just cheat the system. But because there's no enforcement on the road, and this is a national problem, then, they get away with it. If the risk of getting caught is low, if the profits are higher and the consequences are not much, then you will continue to have cheating. And that needs to be addressed. The big one that, as Tim said, we're in a crisis. We are chronically, critically short of truck drivers in this state. And it's, we spoke about, the mining sector because we've cut FIFO drivers off. We have FIFO drivers, and you've met them, in the Pilbara who have been up there now for 7 months and never been home. Because if they leave this state, they cannot get back. This is their livelihood. This is how they feed their families. And people say, well, go home. No, they can't. This is where they make their money. They've got to feed a family. Those poor people have been stuck there for 7 months because they can't go home because we can't get them back. All right? That's not even made the media.
That means they won't come back.
They won't come back.
That's right.
Which means we increase the scale of the shortage we have. But it means because there's more money within mining, in general sense, they can pay more than we do in ag, that we can do in our cold supply chains that supply us with our food from the east and other places. So we're losing drivers up there and creating a shortage that's more widespread. But it's some bigger issues that the shortage isn't going to be fixed with a Band-Aid. I've worked at great length with Tim and with yourself on this. We have structural failings in our industry. We have not addressed how we recruit people. We have not given them a pathway into our industry. We have not linked training, licensing and experience into an employment pathway. We have not at all looked after how we're going to look after our people on the road, in the conditions, their employment. A rest area is their workplace. Nobody in this planet creates a rest area, a workplace rest area, which is what a truck bay is, and not put in shade, toilet facilities, just the basics of humanity. That's beyond third world. Yet we consider that acceptable in our industry. It's not. It's unacceptable. Those things. So we say, oh, we struggle to recruit people. We struggle to lift from 9% of women in our industry to bring more people in. We struggle to reduce the age of our line haul drivers, for which one of our biggest fleet companies in WA currently sits at 57 years old. 57 is the average age of a line haul driver. We've got two major companies in this state who have just employed a 73-year-old and a 74-year-old on line haul because they can't get people. All right? 73 and 74, you should be out fishing and enjoying life and rejecting the bowls club. But there are things there that we should be doing. So training. And finally, I want to touch on is productivity. All right, we have repeatedly in this state, there's things that we can do. If we've got a shortage of truck drivers, let's make it more productive. We are roadblocked both at a state level and a national level in productivity. Now, some of those, for example, in urban areas, we have a national strategy to infill our cities. As you infill our cities, we increase the demand for transport. That is online deliveries, it's waste collection, it's construction, all those activities that come to support a community. Currently, the waste transport industry in this state is saying that our productivity for waste collection is down 20% in urban areas because we get soft curfews at different locations. Our urban planners do not consider logistics as part of their urban planning. Our removalists, for example, when they're trying in some of these new housing estates, the roads are so narrow that they're only accommodating one car in a garage, so everybody parks on the side of the street. You can't get the truck up to deliver your new TV that you've just bought from, one of the JB Hi-Fi, Harvey Norman, whatever. We can't get the trucks up. The removalists can't navigate trucks up the street because the car's parked on the side. Power lines are too low. Average height of a truck is 4.3, standard height. We've got over 1,300 power lines in Perth that are below the average height of a truck. Not too many people want to try to drive a truck into a power line. It's not a good outcome. But there's no mandated requirement for it. The issues are broad and we just lack it. We just lack a recognition of our industry. We are not a vertical industry in the sense of mining or ag or whatever else. Yesterday I had three different business sectors ring me on different issues, and they ask us to provide transport knowledge. Because in forestry, their core business is forestry, but they have transport. They don't see the transport lines up with forestry, but in totality, we all have the same common issues. And that's largely where we're positioned. We are not treated as a sector, but I'll say this, if we treated transport as a sector in this state, we are about the fourth largest sector of the economy in the state. We connect every sector, every community, every business, every exporter depends on our transport industry. The National Freight Supply Chain Strategy only focused on the rail connectivity from the major miners to the port and said that's world class. Totally forgetting that the mining industry in this state, and you saw the amount of stuff we move up the road, is all supplied, sustained and maintained by the road transport industry. We are critical to this state. We are critical to supplying a community on Belgo, on the Tanami, who's only got a dirt road, that we have to service them all year round. We've got roads through the Kimberley, the size of Spain. Kimberley's the size of Spain. We have one sealed road. That is our major highway connecting us to Darwin. It has got 8 to 9 single-lane bridges on the national highway. We've got less than 30% of the roads in this state are sealed. And even those that are sealed don't have shoulders that are safe. So we need as an industry to come together as a horizontal to be more assertive or more put forward the value we provide to the economy. And that is where one point I make is we just don't cut through. It is too common for the Deputy Prime Minister, even for our own Premier and others, to stand up on projects and go, this project will remove X number of trucks from the road, as if we are the public enemy. Transport is not the public enemy. We maintain people's livelihoods, and we have got some of the best people. We have got some of the best equipment kicking around. We don't advertise it, we don't promote it to the community, therefore we struggle. And that's, that's at the heart of it. I just want to enter this final point. Fremantle Port. At Fremantle Port, we have an inner city working port. Now, we went to the Fremantle Council down there, Brad Pettit, and I put it to Brad Pettit and said, look, Brad, you want to retain the inner harbour. All right, we want to make that inner harbour efficient. Now, I support rail, by the way, but 80% of the stuff we move off that port is by road. So would you, as a council, support us running 4 containers off the port instead of 3, so more productive? And in return, we will run cleaner vehicles. There are clean, low noise, low emission vehicles. That's good for you, that's good for your community. It's a no-brainer. They support it. We've now got 3 councils along the route that support it. Our industry is prepared to support it. We can reduce the costs to our community, to our businesses, and have a more productive port. We can reduce the number of trucks on the road. Do we cut through? No. So,
where was the stumbling block?
Where's the stumbling block? The stumbling block is just this ideology.
From who?
From governments.
Right.
That the rail, I support rail. Rail is... Sorry, Cameron, I'm coming because I know the answer. Yeah.
And your passion is fantastic. It gives me wind under my wings. But you've got the Mayor of Fremantle, who's all for it. You've got the industry, who's all for it. Yep. You've got 3 councils along the route, and I live along the route, who are all for it, who poo-pooed it.
It just doesn't get through the state government.
Thank you.
And similarly, we have the same issue. Road productivity we have racked up a national debt beyond belief, a state debt. We all have. Road productivity should be on the agenda. It should be being driven forward. We are going to have to trade our way out. We are a commodity exporting state. That's what we do. That's what our road transport industry supports. Road productivity should be front and centre, and I'd rather use the term productive safety, or link the two together. There are some fantastic things our industry could be doing, but we just don't get through. Those arguments are not being won.
Hence, that's why, Cam, and Senator Rice, you still online? Senator McDonald?
Yes, thanks, Chair.
Great. I'm going to come to you, Senator McDonald. I'm glad you're here because I know there's so many things you raised there, Cam. And how do I bottle you and get you on the federal sphere, and you can speak for one voice for this industry in Canberra? My God, how could anyone disrepute the importance of the transport industry? I've been dying to hear that language in Canberra. I can't find it, mate. So if I can be on your campaign team to get you to Canberra, God, count me in. Senator McDonald, there's many things that Mr. Dumansey raised, and I know I've got a host of questions, but I want you to go first.
Thank you very much, Chair, and thank you very much for your presentation, Mr. Dumansey. That was just terrific, and like Senator Sterle, I too would love to hear this kind of rhetoric coming out of Queensland. We too are a mining and agricultural state, and our roads and our transport industry are so important. And yet, like your challenges in WA and the Northern Territory, we've had a Labor state government that doesn't build truck stops, that doesn't build enough bridges and adequate roads to get the job done. And I was just so pleased to hear you get all of that on the record for this Senate inquiry. I want to just ask you a couple of specific questions from your submission, though. You note that you don't believe the heavy vehicle licensing system produces competent and skilled drivers and that perhaps an industry training program is required. We've heard a lot of evidence yesterday about an apprenticeship program. Is that the sort of thing you're talking about, or would you expand on what that program might look like?
Yeah, thanks, Senator. So, first of all, the current licensing system does not produce employable people. A person like me can go out and get my heavy rigid, and I used to drive a heavy rigid and dog at one stage. Was I a good truck driver? No, I was absolutely lousy. That's why I do what I do. But I could go out and get theoretically, because I've held it long enough, I can go and get a HC licence, heavy combination licence now with 8 hours training. I am not employable. I do not have the experience. I do not have the skills. But it goes further than this. So we have structural failings in our system. The licensing is controlled by the licensing department. What that basically does is says that I can steer a truck and I know the road rules. But as a heavy vehicle industry, there is another set of rules that exists, and that is the RAV network, the compliance, the maintenance. There's a whole raft of other things that a driver needs to know that is probably 10 times more time than just a licensing element. But then finally it gets down to experience. We just don't give them experience. So at the moment we've got a chronic skill shortage in this industry, but we've actually got a heck of a lot of people that are licensed, but they're not employable because they don't have the experience, they haven't got the additional qualifications. So the reason we push for an apprenticeship or a traineeship, well, mute on the terminology, is we've got a proposal we're pushing forward from one of the companies who's prepared to employ 25 people a year as an apprentice over 3 years. So over a 5-year period, they will train 125 people. They will pay 80% of their wages and costs, all right, for the training. They're looking for a 20% offset from the government, and that's fair, but we're struggling to push that through. But over that 3 years, they will spend time learning the basics of our industry, but in a warehouse, driving a forklift, starting with the basic vehicles, progressing up to the next levels, and finally up to a level beyond, say, heavy combination. But at the end of the 3 years, we've now got an employable person who's got real experience. People are prepared to do that. Now, strictly speaking, the big corporations can afford to do that. Smaller companies, because they've got limited fleets, couldn't employ apprenticeship. But the construction industry's overcome that by creating a group training system. Now, we've floated it with the couriers, I've floated it with the concrete agitator drivers who drive the next heavy rigid level up, and said, if we got a group training model up, would you as couriers, for example, employ or warehousing people, employ them for the first year? I said, yeah, we'll do that. I said, because in the second year, we'll progress them to the next licence level, which is heavy rigids, but driving concrete agitators or other type of trucks around town. I've spoken to them and said, would you take them as second year apprentices? Yeah, we'll do that. And then third year, we just haven't got to. But that concept is there. We can, as an industry, start to really become a profession, because that's the word that misses from us. We are not seen as a profession, and because we don't have a training that underpins a profession.
Just before you go, Senator McDonald, sorry, Cam, can you just explain for the purposes for Hansard when you talk RAV routes or RAV network, just exactly what that is?
Okay, so Western Australia has a system which is a pre-approved network of roads which allow different combination types of vehicles. So there's up to 10 different combination types. So for example, we will have a triple road train network that's already pre-mapped on the network. And so you don't need to apply for a permit, you need to be accredited to prove to the government and to the industry that you are a competent operator. But if you have that, you can then operate a triple road train on a pre-approved network that crosses the state. We run what's effectively called an access licence system. So through your national discussions, you may hear the terminology operator licence coming up. In Western Australia, we're already pretty much there, in that if you are accredited, you are able to access that network. To put that in perspective, if I lose my accreditation to run between Perth and Port Hedland, which is roughly the same distance as Melbourne to Brisbane, I can run a triple road train once I get to the road train assembly area. So that means I've got one driver pulling 3 trailers. I'm productive. If I lose my accreditation, I can still use a single semi-trailer, but now I have to do either 3 trips or pay for 3 drivers. So there is value in our commercial value in our accreditation system. That's why WA is so defensive, amongst many reasons, for keeping the National Heavy Vehicle Regulator out of Western Australia.
I'm with you, all the way. All right, thanks for that, Cam. Sorry, Susan, sorry, Senator McDonald, I just had to get that on the record, someone listening. So, Senator McDonald, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Chair. So you've stated that you believe fines disproportionately target drivers. Can you give an example of this and perhaps a solution that would lead to safer roads and better outcomes for drivers and the business owners?
Yeah, good question, Senator McDonald. I'll give you one example, because I had to deal with this 2 years ago. But this is an actual example. We had a driver in a 2-up team who was woken up sleeping, so he's sleeping in the cab, in the bunk. He was woken up by the police enforcement team in South Australia and asked to produce his logbook. He had not signed his logbook off before he'd gone to rest. The fine was $750. So I went to bat for him, said, I'll just do a bit of a quick flick through. A footballer from one of the AFL teams in South Australia, in about the week previous, had been before the court, had crashed into 4 vehicles and fled the scene, was fined $500. One is an administrative error, an oversight. So look at, from our perspective, just the fundamentals of this, basics of it. A driver goes from here to Melbourne, it's 3,800 kilometres one way, turns around, comes back. Probably going to earn, $700, $800 in the hand, may earn more. He's driving back, he's now been fined $750. He's still 2,000 kilometres from home. She or he rings up the partner at home and says, I've just been fined $750. I've been fined a week's wages. Right? I've been fined my wages for the week. I don't think the partner is going to be overly happy. Therefore, they're going to ring the driver. There's probably going to be a nattering on the phone. The driver's mind is no longer on the road. It's on the fact of what is he coming home to, or she coming home to. All right, how does that help road safety? All right, it does not help road safety. So Gary Marn, I've got great respect for in Queensland. Bit of work, you could almost aspire to be a Western Australian, but Gary has really drilled into this fatigue thing. The fatigue rules are just over the top. Originally they came out, and we need fatigue rules, don't get me wrong, but they came out with about 1 page of rules. I think he now quotes, we've got 104 pages of fatigue rules. All right, the fines, the rules are just, they're disconnected from the reality of safety. And that's where I think we've just got to rethink this thing. At some point in time, you've got to take a breath and say, are we really achieving what we're trying to achieve? And we're not. And, there's other people who present to me today, and hopefully they'll bring up the size of the fines they got on trips to the east. We struggle to get drivers now to cross the paddock, to drive across the Nullarbor to go east, because the fines are so horrendous. And therefore, as a consequence, we struggle to recruit drivers for that leg.
What a terrific answer and great explanation. And I hear exactly what you're saying about being more practical in implementing fatigue management and administration. I've just got another question for you. You've talked about something that's near and dear to my heart. Senator Sterle hears me talk about this often, which is fair payment for farmers, which have a not dissimilar supply chain to what the trucking industry does, and often they cross over being part of the same supply chain. I thought you had a really practical presentation on, it's very difficult to enforce a payment mechanism for the driver if the truck owner or the business owner is not getting a fair contract for their work. So you've provided a recommendation within your submission to identify and convey the critical value of road transport to our exporters and regional producers. But, just talk a bit more about how you see a fair price being awarded for the transport supply chain. Because I hear exactly what you're saying. I've got the same worries in agriculture, but I am concerned that if you legislate or regulate for the driver without getting the supply chains, whether it be resource companies or supermarkets or whoever it might be, to pay a fair price, then you'll just put smaller operators out of business.
Yeah, look, that's a fantastic question. So we pressure, obviously, the driver issue is important, but you're dead right. So we talk about farm gate prices for milk. I think was probably one of the best ones, where the dairy farmers were being the farm gate price was just was unsustainable, and so they're pressured. Therefore, they pressure the transport companies, and it flows down the chain. So we start at the retailer, which effectively starts at the consumer, who says we are not prepared. We want the cheapest price for our milk, the cheapest price for everything else. Well, somewhere along the line, a little bit like GST, we may need to put a transparent price on it, which says, here's a supply chain safety levy, which is added to or a farm productivity cost or levy that's applied at the till. There was a thing about Buy Australian years ago, I read, where it said something like 96% of people will buy Australian until such time as they get to the till, and they'll go for the cheapest price. That is a basic of human nature, and we're probably all guilty of it. Somewhere on the line, we used to have pre-GST, we had all these hidden charges and taxes in sales, and I used to run a manufacturing company, actually making fire trucks based in Ballarat. The company that manufactured the prime mover was Iveco in Dandenong. Because of the hidden taxation charges we had, it was cheaper for them to ship it to New Zealand and then reship it back as a built fire truck to Melbourne than it was for me to ship it from Dandenong to Ballarat, build it in Ballarat and then ship it to Victoria, to Melbourne. But we brought GST in, which exposed charges. We could potentially consider something like that. There are people far higher pay grades than I and smarter than I that could probably work out how to work that one out. But you're dead right. The other thing is the agricultural sector. So in WA, the ag sector for us, particularly dryland cereal crops, is massive. We've got something like 60 regional councils and local communities that depend on that wheat crop. We export, I think it's around 80 to 90% of that crop. We're currently being undercut massively by the Ukraine and Russian republics, which can outproduce us dryland cereal crop at about 3 times what we can grow it at. They're now landing it in Indonesia cheaper than what we are. So our traditional response is going to be, well, let's just squeeze down the costs in the supply chain, squeeze the transport drivers down, squeeze down shipping rates. Somewhere along the line, we've just got to say, we can't keep doing that. We're going to have to rethink our entire supply chains and how we remain productive. You can't keep, it's like, I used to teach this stuff at uni, one of the postgrads years ago, and I used to use an analogy like those, those long cylindrical kids' balloons, those really long, thin things that, completely blow your lungs inside out as you try and blow them up. But imagine if inflated one of those. What we do under our current model is we squeeze one part of that tube and we squeeze the cost out of it. It doesn't take the cost out of that. It doesn't remove the air. If we say the air is cost, we're not removing the cost from the balloon. All we're doing is that we're moving it somewhere else. Yeah, we might squeeze the cost out, but it's moving it to safety costs. It's moving it to other things. What we need to do is start thinking, how do we let the air out of that balloon? How do we start becoming more productive, more cost effective? And there is nowhere within this state and within this nation where we're starting to talk about more efficient, more productive supply chains. We've got to pay people better. We can't compete against Bangladesh and other nations with a race to the bottom. That's just inequitable. People need to be able to live, they need to be able to feed their families, all right? That is a fundamental of life. And it's our farmers and our transport operators. We've got to start coming together. We've got to stop this tribalism. It's road versus rail versus sea versus air. That's a tribe. That's got to finish. When I was ex-army for what it's worth, you know, in the mid-70s still, we used to have a Minister for Army, a Minister for Navy and a Minister for Air. We used to treat all three services separately. We think that would be ludicrous now. We have a Minister for Defence because all three services need to work together. All modes in our country need to start working together. It isn't WA or our road transport industry versus the rail industry. That's ridiculous. Our farmers need to be productive on a world stage because when they're productive, they sell more. That creates more freight tasks. That's more jobs for our industry, more jobs for rail, better income for our economy. We've got to drop the tribalism and start to look at how we compete globally, particularly for an export-orientated state like WA.
Well, I could talk to you much longer, just terrific evidence. Thank you, but I will hand back to you, Chair. I know you've got questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator McDonald. And just for the record, for those listening and for other senators around and who may be reading the Hansard later, this inquiry was driven predominantly by CAM and industry. This is not an inquiry that Glenn Sterl said, I want to do, and then ran off and did. So, and the importance why I'm saying this, because all sides of the industry came together. We were in Canberra and there was some 67 of us and said, look, what is it that we need to do? And it was the industry. So it was the employers, it was the union, and it was the owner drivers and sectors of the industry that said, we've got to shine some pretty bright lights and some dark corners here to get government to actually be, I shouldn't have to say this, but all governments, I'm not picking on one government here, I'm picking on governments, state and federal, to start respecting the transport industry. And I'm all over this, and I agree. And Cam, you did this in your opening statement. So it leads to a number of questions, and I congratulate the industry for coming together. Oh, a couple slinked out the room and pretended they weren't there and they were all for it, but we know who they are, and that's fine. Because we have to hear the voices of the transport operators. This is not a driver versus boss argument. And as I just clearly want to say, my focus is really on the top of the supply chain. And the Prime Minister, I shouldn't even say this because it just sounds turdy. You know, we're all in this together. I couldn't think of anything else. I mean, employers, owner drivers, and drivers and forkies and receival staff and the people who pick up the phone to go do the quotes, we're all part of this great industry. But we are not heard. We are taken for granted. All governments of all persuasions, of all colours, of all levels, just see us as the cash cow that just keeps giving. And I'm not going to hold back, and I don't care if it's Liberal, Labor or anything. They're all as bad as each other. And to this day, in 2020, when we can't even have a transport minister, state or federal, have at least the brains, let alone the political antenna, to have close, glued to their hip, the industry, as the advisory council of how can they become a good transport minister. Because you know what? They don't even talk transport. They don't think about transport, and you're buying. I'll tell you what, that's cost you the Lamingtons at Smoke out there, Smokey. All right, mate? You in for that too? Yeah, okay. That's it. But I want to get, and you don't hold back, Cam. What does the governments all levels need to do? Who do they need to engage? And if you were the minister, state or federal, what would it look like?
I would actually create a national minister for transport. Just start at the basics. We as a nation the most remote, okay, in Perth, we are the most remote capital city in the world other than Honolulu. We live a first world lifestyle, all right? We can bring stuff in. We do that. We have mining deposits. We have agricultural deposits. We could have the world's best mineral deposits. We could have the world's best farming deposits. But if we can't get to support them and we cannot get them to market, we've got nothing. What this state has and what this nation has is a world-class transport industry. And that's all modes, because that's how we work. But we're never given respect and credit for it. There is no minister for transport, in the Minister for Freight. We don't have one, all right? We do not have a minister that sits there and says to the farming community, all right, how are we going to get your stuff to market more productively? We've just been to Kununurra, all right? In Kununurra, we've got the ore dam, one of the greatest untapped assets this country has. They could reduce, we're growing stuff up there and we can't get it to market. We seal the Tanami Road. They'll knock 30% out of their supply chain costs, all right, to get it down to market. Tanami runs from Halls Creek to Alice Springs. No one takes that on the table. No one's sitting there valuing the role of road transport industry and saying these are critical to our communities. We just don't have a voice within government. We are fragmented across multiple departments. I come back to it. We're a horizontal market sector. We cross every sector of the economy. We deliver everything but the delivery of babies, which is our standard euphemism, you know that. But that's also reflected in government. We have no single voice championing the industry. We need one. The industry, and a credit to you, has come together. As you said, we're coming to this inquiry, not with union versus employers, not with owner drivers versus fleet drivers, all right? Not with warehouse workers versus, the schedulers. We're coming to you as an industry saying, we've got a problem. Yep. We need help. It is no longer acceptable in this day and age for our people to be on the road operating in third world conditions, to be one of the most dangerous industries in the country, to have supported this entire state through COVID and to be given nothing but a token passing recognition for the efforts of our drivers. 90 hours a week, some of our cold supply chain drivers were working in order to keep fresh food and vegetables, not just into the state, but distributed across the state. What credit do they get? Nothing. All right? We've got to start to come together as an industry. We're too fragmented. We too much like to squabble amongst ourselves. And that supports the customers. They like it when we squabble. We've got to become united. And we've got to start to push our case, because without us, nothing will move. And I really thank you for it, but we need a united voice, both as an industry and we need it within state and federal governments.
Yes, that's good, Cameron. And just for the record, I'm very lucky that I've got a great supporter across the political table in Senator McDonald, who has been a fantastic champion for the transport industry, as have all the crossbenchers and the Greens who supported this inquiry. It's just sadly that we were greatly disrespected by the Deputy Prime Minister, who voted against us to have an inquiry. It was Mickey Mouse, and if everything's Mickey Mouse, well, what I've heard travelling around this nation and on the Hansard record, is far from Mickey Mouse. So let's go a little bit further here, Cam, and that, I thank you for that answer, and I'd probably throw out the challenge of who would think that's a bad idea. But let's go a little bit further up the chain too, and I feel like I'm banging my head against a brick wall and have been for many years. But let's talk about the failure of the top of the supply, the success of the top of the supply chain to escape any scrutiny along the transport supply chain. And we know this, and you know that I don't get any Christmas invites from the miners, because I've made it quite clear that they're one of the worst, and let's not leave Coles and Woolies and Aldi out of there. So let's talk a little bit more, that if you had the keys to Treasury and we were talking about the top of the supply chain who screw the living daylights out of your members and out of Tim's members and out of owner drivers and small businesses who aren't members of anything, what do we need to do to fix that? What would that look like? I know I've got a plan.
Okay. So what we would suggest, and Tim and I have already working here in WA, is we had a reference calculator, a price calculator for the transport industry. Now, not So there should be a guideline rate for what it roughly costs to do X, Y, Z by different combinations. So in the event, and I'll use an example, one of our members was undercut. Now, bear in mind, our industry runs at about a 3 to 5% gross margin. It's tight. One of our members was undercut on a job by 18%.
That's gross margin.
Gross margin.
Profit.
Yeah, we're not talking profit. Profit doesn't exist in current environment.
Yep.
So they come in, they're undercut by 18%. The margins were never there. So the question becomes, you need somewhere to go to the company that awarded the contract. Now, the company that awarded the contract, and I'll leave the supply chain out of it, the company that awarded that contract had over 40 years' knowledge of what it cost to do their business for transport. So I could come in and undercut by 18% if I had a change of combination or I got an improved access. So in other words, I can carry more for less, or on the load of the vehicle, or I've got a better access for the vehicle. Now, I know in both cases that didn't happen. So we're talking the same vehicle combinations on the same routes. So how do we get down to 18%? Because as a company, nobody's a charity, they've got to make money. So there's very few things you can squeeze out of transport. You can't really get your fuel costs down. If you're a big buyer, yeah, you'll get it down. There's very few mechanisms. The first thing that will go is maintenance, tyres. And one of the best indicators is you drive along the road and you start seeing a lot of, tyre debris over the road, you know the industry's in tight because people are using cheap recaps, those sorts of things. So there are very few mechanisms in it. So let's come back to if we had the enforcement powers. You could go to the company, someone's got to trigger the complaint, and companies themselves will come to me with these, and they will go, we could go into the company that awarded the contract and go, we would like to know, because we've got a guide calculator here, that you're sitting below 18% below a sustainable rate, whatever it may be. Can you please justify how you did that? Now, they may say, well, look, we've done this, they may have a reason. There may be a justification for it, but make them prove it. If they cannot prove that, then there has to be mechanisms against it. The fines need to be delivered at director level. So I come back to my initial statement when I said the transport manager, the contracts manager of the mining company was getting a performance bonus, effectively the thing. Make the directors of the mining company liable and say that you cannot willfully turn a blind eye to public safety by awarding cheap road transport contracts where they can't prove there's any competitive. Until you hold the directors at the top of the supply chain liable, nothing changes. Nothing changes. That's where we've got to make the enforcement levels.
And I could not, there is a cigarettes paper difference between your view and my view, and you're not alone, or we're not alone, because this is also echoed in other parts of Australia too, where we've been. And it's refreshing to hear, and I say this, it's refreshing to hear that the employers who have got a lot to risk just as much as everyone else, who have now, and I've noticed this language probably in the last sort of 4 or 5 years more than ever before, it used to be around, but are actually now voicing it, that they cannot squeeze the sponge anymore. And I know, and I've got so much, as you know, and we've talked about this, Cam, on my desk, information. I've got major beverage companies out there, and I won't name who they are, demanding 150-day payments. And there ain't too many companies that can run fleets of vehicles carting thousands of tonnes per week and carry 150 days of debt. So we've had chain of responsibility in this nation, and there's been a little bit of talk about it. I know when chain of responsibility was first flagged, it was going to be the silver bullet, and what we've seen is it's just whacked up truck drivers. There's been a few prosecutions, there has been, but I'm still waiting for that prosecution that says ex-miner, ex-retailer or whatever, people have gone to jail or whatever it might be. So we do need, so you're saying legislative teeth, give it, not like the Fair Work Ombudsman who's out to lunch every day. And some of my people say to me, oh, don't be too harsh on the Fair Work Ombudsman. Stuff the Fair Work Ombudsman. Okay, they're asleep at the wheel. They think they're doing a massive job, fantastic job because they've got some Vietnamese strawberry grower or some rubbish like this. When we know, and leads me to the next one, wage theft in this nation. Now, there hasn't been a lot of conversation around wage theft, but from your point of view as an employer, are you aware of wage theft in this state of Western Australia where your members have lost work and you did touch on it, and the only thing left could be, and you have heard the evidence like I have, of some of the ridiculous kilometre rates or underpayment of awards? Because you said it, Cam, and I'm going to put my spin on the Stirl spin on it now. There are more rewards in this nation to do the wrong thing in the road transport industry as long as you don't get caught. You got some views around that?
Yeah, I think there needs to be greater enforcement of wages. Well, I've had complaints from some. Bear in mind, we've got a lot of family-owned companies that I represent. And these people, and I just want to touch on this point because I haven't made it before. I've seen one of our members physically sick because of the stress, because he couldn't look after one of his drivers who had a family issue, because he didn't have the capacity to do so. These people care about their workers and their staff. Some of them have been with them for 10, 15, 20, 30 years. They're as much a family. And we talk about employers and employees like they're on either side of a seesaw. That's not always the case. And so I come back to there's two parts to this. So in the first instance, yes, I think there needs to be, we have had reports, and I have spoken to Tim about it because we don't hide it. We will not tolerate theft of wages. Why should one of our companies pay award rates, and we actually pay way above awards often in Western Australia? Why another company can lose contract work to another company that underpays? We won't tolerate that, and we'll stand up and we support, those things not going on. But the second part of it is, we have such an complex industrial EBA system and other things now. So we come back to some of these software systems. When you configure a software payroll system, you have to configure it for every type of pay construct you've got. When they're being paid, their different award conditions and whatever it may be. That's actually quite complex. So the more complex your EBA system, your award system, and we've now got 1,400 plus EBAs, I think they're in the nation, and you may have multiple people on different EBAs within the thing. That comes a degree of complexity that the poor payroll clerk has to be across. So I in defence of our members, sometimes I think that complexity of the industrial system feeds into the wage theft. So it's unintended consequences. But others who deliberately do it, we've got to hold them to account. These people are cheating the compliant companies out of work. It should not be tolerated. I'll come back, there's very few things you can squeeze. You either squeeze maintenance or you squeeze wages. We're not going to tolerate squeezing the wages when we've got people paying the right wages, looking after their people. Why should they lose business to a cheat?
Yeah. And I think one of the biggest bugbears I've had on this too, and I did mention it yesterday, that there's the great cohort of the industry out there being owner-operators, the single one-truck family business thing. And unfortunately, in the nation's capital, they don't even rate, let me tell you. They don't even exist, and what we do know is that the owner-drivers, and the owner-drivers are very small, and I'm not trying to denigrate any other part of the industry, conduct the most freight movements in this nation. And they've got nowhere to go. So while we've got unscrupulous operators being rewarded by under-award, and I think the award's an embarrassment, but anyway, it's a legislative tool there that says thou shalt be paid X amount of rupees for doing whatever we do and whatever size vehicle we do it. When there is blatant wage theft under that, not only screwing the bigger companies who are losing the fleet, but what I find also is it just keeps knocking down to the owner-drivers. And that great cohort of people, where the hell do they go? And I do say I've got some fantastic relationships with some of the big operators in this nation, but every morning I wake up and think, you created this. A lot of the bigger ones too, but anyway, that'll be for another day. You got any views around, on your last one, Cam? I know we're running out of time, and we've talked about bringing in the top end of town, legislative teeth. Tim was talking about that earlier. Everyone around the nation's talking about that. You've gone one step further, and I know Nat Roads will make a good contribution on that. We've got to make some fines and get serious and enforcing from the bottom up, underpayments and all that sort of stuff. What about owner drivers? Where do you see where the future for owner drivers, the way we're going at the moment, and is there something that you think needs to be done, because they are an integral part of the industry, to protect them? Not setting their rate for them for every minute of the day, but is there something you see there?
Yeah, so firstly, there's two parts. So first one, let's clarify an owner driver. And the first one to me, an owner driver, I mean, you're going to hear from Yogi. I consider Yogi an owner driver. He gets out, he's got a business, touts for his own work, he's got his own branding, and he wins his work. To me, that's a true owner driver. We then have what are effectively, I think there's a name for it, captured subbies.
Yeah.
And we tend to group them together. And I think we've got to separate them a little bit. So we've got companies who use subby drivers. They've got the company livery on the truck. They're effectively given a nominated rate. They're basically an employee for all intensive purposes. That employee subby thing needs to be separated from owner drivers. So owner drivers are the backbone of the country, because ultimately a company, so if we say we've got a base level of transport tasks, and I'll have a fleet employment level up to that consistent level of employment. Above that, to cover with the rise and falls, that's where I use owner drivers. Yeah. And who come in, and they're effectively our variable workforce. You need that. We need them. We need owner drivers. But how do you bring a voice for the owner drivers? Because the problem with the industry is the structural nature of it. And I'll give one example. We had a company, they were carting two preloaded, they were taking a triple up road train up to Port Hedland. So they were all preloaded Pantex. The company took the two trailers up to Woburn, which you can do, but then the third trailer, they got a subby company to take that up. So they picked the trailer up. Now, the way it worked is let's say it was a mining company, contracts a big company to do the transport. They then contracted a mid-sized company to do the dog run, which is the movement of the single trailer up to Woburn. Yep. The mid-sized company actually then contracted to one of their owner drivers, who subcontracted to a mate of his. So we've got 5 contractual chains here. The poor owner driver who picked up the thing got pulled over by the inspectors, asked to open the back of the trailer, and it happened to have DG in it. He said, "Where's the paperwork?" Didn't have it. The driver was fined, and the next company up was fined. No one else up the chain was fined. Yeah. You know, so we've got structural problems in the industry there in how we work. So we tend to run a chain of contracts cascading down. Every one of them taking a margin along the way. So by the time it gets to the bottom, there isn't a lot left. So coming back to it, we've got to find a way for the owner drivers to be recognised for what they are. But I think we also need to look at separating them from the subby drivers, because they're a different type of individual. And how we do that is something that, you know, I'm happy to represent, but ultimately that needs to be covered by the owner drivers themselves. Yeah, true. Okay.
All right, look, on that, Kevin, thank you, and I'm mindful of the time because Senator McDonald has got something to do. So can I thank you very much, and I do offer this for Craig and Louise, I really do. We'll give them the opportunity. There's no doubt on the further inquiry. So let's suspend for 15 minutes. That's right. Yep, 15 minutes. We'll be back at 11:15, where we will hear from, I think, the livestockies, aren't they?
Yeah.
Yep. Livestock and Rural Transport Association.